Market Day Mayhem. Leo Maxwell brandished a wooden spoon like a gleaming sword, deflecting imaginary arrows as he surveyed his domain, the Maxwell family fruit stall. Apples became enchanted orbs, peaches, potent healing stones. "Halt, villain," he cried, his voice barely audible above the market's cacophony. Mrs. Higgins' prize-winning goose was, of course, a fearsome dragon guarding its hoard of golden eggs. He'd been banished to peeling potatoes an hour ago, but his imagination refused to be contained. His mother, bless her patient soul, merely sighed and rearranged a pyramid of oranges. "Leo, darling, focus. We have customers." A gaggle of matrons, their baskets swaying, approached the stall. Leo, ever the showman, morphed back into a helpful vendor. "Finest apples this side of the Whispering Woods, ladies. Guaranteed to keep the doctor away, or your money back." He winked, and they chuckled, charmed by his enthusiasm. The air, thick with the smells of freshly baked bread, smoked sausages, and blooming lavender, vibrated with the energy of Willow Creek's market day. It was the heart of the town, a place where gossip flowed as freely as the creek that gave the town its name. A new sound cut through the familiar din, the rhythmic clip-clop of horses' hooves, followed by the creak of leather and the jingle of spurs. Two figures on horseback emerged from the throng, their uniforms crisp and new. The town guard. Leo watched them dismount, his hand instinctively drifting to the wooden spoon tucked into his apron. One officer, tall and broad-shouldered, exuded a quiet confidence. The other, younger and visibly nervous, kept adjusting his helmet. "New blood," Mrs. Maxwell muttered, more to herself than to Leo. "Let's hope they're better than the last lot." Officer Baker, the nervous one, cleared his throat. "Right, Miller," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "Let's make a good impression." He puffed out his chest, nearly tripping over his own feet in the process. They began their patrol, their eyes scanning the crowd. Baker's gaze lingered a little too long on a group of travelers with patched clothing. Leo frowned. He didn't like the way the officer was looking at them. A low hum of discontent rippled through the vendor stalls. Mrs. Peabody, whose flower stand overflowed with vibrant blooms, was whispering urgently to Mr. Abernathy, the baker. "Did you hear?" she hissed. "Old man Hemlock lost his coin purse. Cleaned out." Mr. Abernathy shook his head grimly. "That's the third one this month. Market's not safe anymore." The whispers spread like wildfire, fueled by fear and suspicion. Leo felt a knot tighten in his stomach. The market was usually a place of joy and community, but now a shadow hung over it. Officer Baker, overhearing the hushed tones, perked up. He nudged Miller. "See? I told you. This town's ripe for trouble." He strutted over to Mrs. Peabody. "Excuse me, madam. We understand there's been a theft." Mrs. Peabody, startled, jumped back. "Well, yes, officer. Poor Mr. Hemlock." Baker scribbled furiously in his notepad, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Description of the suspect. Any unusual characteristics. Leo watched, his grip tightening on his wooden spoon. Something felt wrong. The way Baker was practically salivating at the prospect of a criminal, the way he dismissed the vendor's concerns with a wave of his hand. This was not the kind of justice he envisioned in his heroic daydreams. He glanced at his mother, her brow furrowed with worry. The market day, once a celebration, was quickly unraveling into something far more sinister. The adventure he craved was here, all right, but it wasn't the kind he'd imagined. Whispers and worries. The aroma of burnt sugar hung heavy in the morning air, a grim counterpoint to the usual sweetness emanating from Gable's bakery. Tommy Baker grimaced, the scent turning his stomach. Mrs. Gable stood amidst the overturned display case, flour dusting her apron like a fresh snowfall. Her face, usually a warm beacon, was etched with worry. "Gone again," she wailed, her voice cracking. The entire tray of sugared almonds. Vanished. Just like the jam tarts last week. Tommy scribbled in his notepad, the nib scratching against the paper. Officer Miller, leaning against the doorframe, surveyed the scene with a practiced air. No sign of forced entry, Mrs. Gable. Anything out of place besides the missing merchandise? She shook her head, a few stray curls escaping her bun. Nothing, officer. Just gone. It's like a ghost is helping themselves. Tommy swallowed, picturing a spectral hand reaching for the almonds. He hated these petty theft cases. They made him feel useless. The bell above the door chimed, announcing a new arrival. Silas Blackwood entered, his weathered face etched with the quiet dignity that Tommy had come to associate with the older man. He wore a tweed jacket, slightly worn but meticulously clean, and carried a canvas bag slung over his shoulder. Silas nodded curtly at the officers and approached the counter. "Morning, Mrs. Gable," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The usual rye, if you please." Mrs. Gable managed a weak smile. "Morning, Mr. Blackwood." "Right away." She moved with a weary grace towards the back, leaving Silas standing near the overturned display. Tommy watched as Silas's gaze swept over the bakery, pausing for a moment on the scattered almonds. He didn't touch anything, just observed with a quiet intensity that made Tommy uneasy. Miller cleared his throat, his eyes narrowed. "Everything all right, Mr. Blackwood?" Silas turned, his gaze steady. "Perfectly, officer. Just ashamed to see things in such disarray." Mrs. Gable returned with the loaf of rye, carefully wrapping it in brown paper. Silas paid her, his movements precise and economical. As he turned to leave, Miller stepped forward, blocking his path. "Just a quick question, Mr. Blackwood," Miller said, his voice deceptively casual. "You were here around this time last week, weren't you? The day the jam tarts disappeared?" Silas's eyes hardened, a flicker of something dark passing across his face. "I am a regular customer, officer. I buy my bread here every Tuesday and Thursday." "Are you accusing me of something?" Tommy shifted uncomfortably, sensing the tension in the air. He thought he saw a tremor in Silas's hand as he gripped the loaf of bread. It was probably nothing, but Miller's suspicion was infectious. The war veteran seemed to be holding back a storm of emotions. "Just routine, Mr. Blackwood," Miller said, but his eyes remained fixed on Silas, unwavering and accusatory. "We have to ask everyone." Silas stared at Miller for a long moment, his silence heavy with unspoken words. Finally, he simply nodded, his jaw tight. He stepped around Miller and walked out of the bakery, the bell chiming softly behind him, a sound that echoed Tommy's growing unease. Outside, a gust of wind rustled the leaves of the willow trees, whispering secrets only they could understand. The Medal of Valor. Leo stacked oranges into a precarious pyramid, picturing Silas Blackwood scaling a treacherous cliff face, a hurricane wind whipping at his trench coat. He imagined Silas reaching the summit, planting a flag in the howling gale, a flag embroidered with, well, probably more oranges. Leo sighed. Even in his imagination, his life revolved around the fruit stall. He heard voices, gruff and low, coming from behind Mr. Abernathy's butcher shop. Curiosity tugged at him, a stronger pull than usual. It wasn't just idle nosiness, it was a growing unease about the way people were looking at Silas lately. He carefully placed a stray mandarin on the pyramid's peak, then edged towards the sound. "Always quiet types, aren't they, Miller?" It was Officer Baker, his voice a little too loud, a little too eager. "Keeps to himself," another voice, deeper and laced with cynicism, replied. "Officer Miller. Too much keeping to himself if you ask me." Seen him eyeing Mrs. Henderson's silverware display. Leo frowned, peering around the corner of the butcher shop. Baker and Miller stood leaning against the brick wall, their faces grim. Baker was fiddling with his belt buckle, a nervous habit Leo had noticed. "But he hasn't actually done anything, has he?" Baker asked, his voice laced with doubt. "Not yet," Miller said, spitting on the ground. But mark my words, Baker, these things escalate. Best to keep a close eye. We don't want another incident like that business at the apothecary last spring. Remember the stink? Leo strained to hear more. Silas Blackwood, a thief? It didn't fit. He remembered the way Silas had helped old Mrs. Gable pick up her spilled groceries last week, the genuine kindness in his eyes. Did you see that medal he was wearing yesterday? Baker continued. I couldn't quite make it out. Some trinket, probably. Likely bought it himself, Miller scoffed. Trying to look respectable. That did it. Leo couldn't stay silent. He stepped out from behind the butcher's shop, his face flushed. It's not just some trinket. The officers jumped, startled. Baker's hand instinctively went to his holster. Leo! What are you doing here? Baker asked, his face reddening. I heard you talking about Mr. Blackwood, Leo said, his voice trembling slightly. He pushed his glasses up his nose. That medal. I know what it is. Miller raised a skeptical eyebrow. Oh, do you now, son? And what is it then, some sort of magic charm against being questioned by the police? It's the Medal of Valor, Leo declared, puffing out his chest. He ignored Miller's sarcasm. My adventure books, the ones about the war. They show pictures of soldiers wearing them. It's for extraordinary bravery in combat. Baker's eyes widened. Really? You're sure? Leo nodded emphatically. Absolutely. It's got a specific design, a golden lion rampant on a field of blue. I saw it glinting in the sunlight yesterday when he bought his apples. He remembered the way Silas had clutched his coat closed afterwards, a fleeting expression of discomfort on his face. As if he regretted showing it. Miller remained unimpressed. Bravery in combat? He's just a quiet old man who buys fruit and minds his own business. Leo glared at Miller. Maybe he earned the right to mind his own business. He turned back to Baker, pleading. You can't just assume he's a thief based on nothing. He's a hero. Probably. Baker looked from Leo to Miller, uncertainty warring on his face. The easy confidence he had displayed earlier seemed to have evaporated. Look, kid, Miller said, his voice softening slightly. We're just doing our jobs. We have to investigate everyone. Leo felt a surge of anger. Investigate facts, not prejudice. He turned and marched back towards the fruit stall, his mind racing. He had to do something to help Silas. He couldn't let them treat a war hero like a common criminal. He just didn't know what to do. False accusations. The sun, a molten coin in the afternoon sky, glinted off the fountain spray as Silas rested on a nearby bench. He watched the water dance, the rhythmic splash a soothing counterpoint to the ache in his prosthetic leg. A shadow fell across him. He looked up to see two uniformed officers standing over him, their faces grim. Silas Blackwood, the taller of the two, Officer Miller, barked, his voice cutting through the tranquil atmosphere. Silas straightened, a flicker of annoyance crossing his features. That's my name. We need to ask you a few questions, Miller continued, his tone accusatory. Beside him, the younger officer, Baker, fidgeted, his eyes darting nervously around the square. About? Silas asked, his voice calm, but with an underlying steeliness. About the robbery at Mrs. Abernathy's antique shop this morning, Miller stated flatly. You were seen in the vicinity. Silas chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. Seen. I walk through this square every day. I hardly think that makes me a thief. We have a description, Miller pressed, his gaze unwavering. Tall, older gentleman, uses a walking stick. He paused, letting the implication hang in the air. Baker shifted his weight, his hand hovering near his holster. Silas noticed the young man's unease and felt a pang of something akin to pity. This was a boy playing at being a policeman. My walking stick is for support, officer, Silas said, gesturing to his leg. A souvenir from a less than pleasant tour in Helmand. He tapped the polished wood against the cobblestones. Miller's eyes narrowed. Don't get smart with me. We have reason to believe you were involved. He took a step closer, invading Silas's personal space. Now, are you going to cooperate, or are we going to do this the hard way? I've cooperated with far worse than you, son, Silas said, his voice low and dangerous. But I won't be bullied. That's it, Miller snapped, reaching for his handcuffs. You're under arrest. Baker, startled by the sudden escalation, fumbled for his own cuffs. Silas stood up, his hand tightening on the handle of his walking stick. Get your hands off me, Silas warned, his voice ringing with authority. He's resisting. Miller shouted, lunging forward. Silas, reacting instinctively, raised his walking stick defensively. The polished wood caught the sunlight, flashing like a weapon. He's got a weapon. Baker yelled, his voice cracking with fear. He drew his sidearm, his hand shaking. The peaceful square erupted into chaos. People screamed and scattered, their afternoon tranquility shattered. Silas stood his ground, his eyes blazing with anger, the walking stick held firm in his grip. He was surrounded, accused, and on the verge of being arrested for a crime he didn't commit, his only weapon a reminder of battles fought and a body betrayed. A boy's brave stand. Leo saw it all unfold like a poorly rehearsed street play. Silas, hands trembling, reaching for a loaf of bread, Baker's meaty hand clamping down on his wrist. Miller sneering. The glint of metal handcuffs. He dropped the bruised peach he was polishing, the sweet juice splattering on the cobblestones. Stop, he yelled, his voice cracking with the force of it. The officers, startled, turned towards him. Baker, face flushed, puffed out his chest. Stay back, son. This doesn't concern you. Leo ignored him, pushing through the thickening crowd. Fear coiled in his stomach, but a fierce protectiveness burned hotter. He planted himself between Silas and the officers, his small frame a defiant barrier. You can't do this. He's Silas Blackwood. He's a hero. Baker exchanged a look with Miller, a flicker of amusement crossing his partner's face. A hero, is it? And I'm the king of Eldoria. He is. Leo insisted, pointing a finger at the tarnished silver medal pinned to Silas's worn jacket. That's the Star of Valor. He earned it at the Battle of Ashwood. He single-handedly held off the Northern Guard for hours, giving the rest of his unit time to retreat. Silence fell over the square. The murmur of the crowd died down, replaced by a collective intake of breath. Silas stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief, a single tear tracing a path through the grime on his cheek. Baker scoffed. Star of Valor. That old thing. Probably bought it at the market. Come on, lad, don't fill your head with stories. He tried to sidestep Leo, but the boy stubbornly shifted, blocking his path. It's true. Leo insisted, his voice rising. My grandpa told me. He fought alongside Silas. He said he was the bravest man he ever knew. He remembered the hushed reverence in his grandfather's voice as he recounted the tales of Ashwood, the unwavering courage of the man called Blackwood. He'd imagined himself in Silas's place 1,000 times, sword raised, facing impossible odds. Miller chuckled, a low, unpleasant sound. And I suppose your grandpa also told you about Silas Blackwood, the notorious thief who robbed a supply train blind a few years back. The air seemed to thicken. Leo faltered, the seed of doubt planted. He glanced at Silas, searching for denial, but found only a haunted emptiness in the man's eyes. Baker seized the opportunity. Enough of this nonsense. Step aside, boy. He reached for Leo, but the boy dodged, scrambling back to Silas's side. He wouldn't. Leo cried, desperation lacing his voice. He wouldn't steal. He's a hero. Baker, his patience clearly exhausted, grabbed Leo by the arm, pulling him away. You're letting your imagination run wild, son. This man is under arrest for theft. He shoved Leo towards the crowd, back into the safety of Mrs. Gable's fruit stall. Ignoring the boy's protests, Baker and Miller tightened their grip on Silas, the cold steel of the handcuffs snapping shut around his wrists. The crowd, uncertain and easily swayed, began to murmur, their sympathy turning to suspicion. The image of a war hero faded, replaced by the convenient narrative of a thief caught red-handed. The real thief revealed. Silas Blackwood moved like a condemned man, each step measured, deliberate. Officer Baker, puffed with misplaced importance, gripped Silas's arm a little too tightly. Miller, radiating a quiet competence that Baker clearly envied, flanked Silas on the other side. The small crowd, once buzzing with market-day chatter, had fallen silent, their eyes glued to the procession. Leo watched from behind Mr. Rossi's fruit stall, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. This felt wrong. The air, thick with the scent of overripe peaches and roasting nuts, suddenly crackled with a different kind of energy. A woman shrieked. "My purse! He's got my purse!" The shriek, sharp and piercing, cut through the heavy silence. All heads turned. A wiry figure, no taller than Leo himself, was darting through the crowd, a plump, embroidered purse clutched in his hand. It was Fingers Frankie, a notorious pickpocket who frequented the seedier parts of the district. Even Baker, momentarily stunned, loosened his grip on Silas. "Stop! Thief!" Baker bellowed, his voice cracking slightly. He shoved Silas towards Miller and lurched after Frankie, tripping over a stray basket and nearly falling flat on his face. The crowd, initially paralyzed, erupted into action. A burly butcher, his apron smeared with blood, blocked Frankie's path. Frankie, nimble as a weasel, tried to dart around him, but the butcher was quicker. He grabbed Frankie by the scruff of his neck, hauling him back towards the center of the square. The stolen purse slipped from Frankie's grasp and landed with a soft thud at Silas's feet. A low murmur rippled through the crowd, a wave of collective realization. Faces flushed with embarrassment. Eyes shifted from Silas to Frankie, and then back again. The silence was broken by the sound of Frankie protesting, "I didn't do nothin'," his voice thin and reedy against the rising tide of the crowd's indignation. Baker, finally regaining his footing, reached Frankie just as the butcher released him. He puffed out his chest, trying to regain some semblance of authority. "I got him. I got the thief." But the words rang hollow, lost in the noise. Leo saw his chance. He pushed past Mr. Rossi, ignoring the old man's protests, and stepped forward. He pointed a trembling finger at Frankie, now squirming in Baker's grasp. "He's the one. I saw him." He bumped into Mrs. Gable near the bakery just before she noticed her purse was gone. Leo embellished slightly, but the core of the story was true. He had seen Frankie near the bakery. The crowd roared its approval. The tide had turned. Silas stood silently, his expression unreadable, as the focus shifted entirely to Fingers Frankie. Even Miller looked uncomfortable, glancing at Silas with something that might have been apology in his eyes. Baker, however, seemed oblivious, basking in the reflected glory of Frankie's capture. He hadn't realized his mistake. Leo imagined the headlines, "Young Officer Nabs Notorious Thief." Baker would be a hero. But at whose expense? Race against time. Leo vaulted over an overturned crate of bruised peaches, scattering them across the cobblestones. Mrs. Gable, whose fruit stall he sometimes helped at, shrieked, but Leo didn't stop to apologize. "Emergency," he yelled, the words ripped away by the wind whipping through the marketplace. He risked a glance back. Mrs. Gable was shaking her fist, a peach clutched like a weapon. He'd make it up to her later. Maybe. He had to reach the town hall. Silas, a war hero, arrested for a petty theft. It was ludicrous. Leo, fueled by adrenaline and a fierce loyalty to the old man who'd once rescued him from a runaway cart, was determined to prove it. His mind conjured images as he ran. Silas, sword flashing, single-handedly holding off a horde of snarling Groggoths. Silas, bravely disarming a doomsday device. All probably exaggerated, Leo knew, but the point remained: Silas was no thief. The new town guard, with their polished armor and suspicious eyes, were making the town feel like a cage. They were all too eager to flex their authority, and Silas, with his rumpled clothes and quiet demeanor, had clearly become an easy target. He burst through the heavy oak doors of the town hall, panting. The bored clerk barely looked up. "Archives," Leo gasped, pointing down the hallway. "Historical records." The archives were a labyrinth of towering shelves crammed with dusty ledgers and yellowed parchments. The air hung thick with the scent of decay and forgotten stories. Sunlight struggled to penetrate the grimy windows, casting long, distorted shadows. Leo felt a prickle of unease. This place felt wrong. He started pulling ledgers at random, coughing as dust billowed around him. Births, deaths, property taxes, endless lists of mundane details. Where would they even keep commendations for valor? He imagined Silas's citation, framed and official, a testament to his bravery. But the sheer volume of documents was overwhelming. Despair began to creep in. Maybe he was wrong. Maybe Silas had changed. He slammed the ledger shut, the sound echoing through the silent room. No. He wouldn't believe it. He had to keep searching. Then, tucked away in a far corner, behind a stack of crumbling maps, he saw it. A small, ornate frame, its glass clouded with dust. He reached for it, his fingers trembling. He wiped the glass with his sleeve and held his breath. Inside, a faded citation, bearing the royal seal. The words were elegant and archaic, but the meaning was clear: "For exemplary courage and unwavering dedication to the crown, Silas Thorne is hereby recognized for his valorous actions." The citation detailed Silas's role in a crucial battle, mentioning the recovery of a stolen artifact that had turned the tide of the war. Relief washed over Leo, so potent he almost buckled. He had it. Proof. He clutched the frame to his chest, a surge of renewed determination coursing through him. Now, he just had to get it to the guard captain before it was too late. Truth unveiled. Leo burst into the town square, breathless. Apples scattered behind him like fallen soldiers. "Wait! Stop!" he yelled, waving the crumpled citation above his head like a victorious flag. Officer Baker, red-faced and puffed up with self-importance, tightened his grip on Silas's arm. "Just trying to make an escape, were you?" he sneered. Officer Miller stood beside him, a smirk playing on his lips. Silas, surprisingly calm, merely sighed. "I have proof." Leo shrieked, dodging a stray chicken. He finally reached the small group, his chest heaving. "Proof that you're making a terrible mistake." Baker rolled his eyes. "All right, lad, let's see this proof." He clearly didn't believe a word of it. Leo unfolded the citation with trembling hands. The parchment crackled in the sudden hush that had fallen over the square. Even the gossiping women by the well had fallen silent, their eyes fixed on him. He cleared his throat. "This is a commendation of valor," he announced, his voice wavering slightly. "Awarded to Silas Blackwood, for..." He paused, his eyes scanning the text. "For single-handedly defending the West Gate against a horde of Grolac raiders, allowing the evacuation of civilians and preventing the sacking of Oakhaven." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Baker's face paled. Miller's smirk vanished. Leo continued, gaining confidence with each word. "It says here, Blackwood, with unparalleled bravery and tactical acumen, held the line for over an hour, personally dispatching at least 15 Grolacs before reinforcements arrived. His actions were instrumental in saving countless lives and preserving the sanctity of our town." He lowered the citation, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces. Does that sound like a thief to you? Baker stammered, but, the description, the apples. He was buying them. Leo exclaimed, pointing back towards the fruit stall, now a scene of abandoned chaos. I saw him. He was paying with silver. Silence hung heavy in the air. Then, a murmur started, growing louder and louder. People began to voice their disbelief, their outrage. Silas Blackwood. A hero? They were arresting a war hero? Baker's shoulders slumped. He released Silas's arm as if it had suddenly become red hot. I didn't know, he mumbled, avoiding Silas's gaze. Miller, ever the pragmatist, nudged Baker. We had a description. We were just doing our job. But even his voice lacked conviction. Silas finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. Perhaps next time, officer, you should ask a few more questions before jumping to conclusions. He straightened his coat, a flicker of something that might have been amusement in his eyes. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have apples to eat. He turned and walked away, the crowd parting before him like the Red Sea. Baker and Miller stood there, deflated and looking profoundly ashamed. The weight of their mistake settled upon them, heavy and undeniable. The townsfolk averted their eyes, the earlier excitement replaced by a palpable sense of disappointment. Leo watched them, a mixture of triumph and concern churning within him. He knew he had done the right thing, but he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. A hero's welcome. The crowd's joyous clamor followed Silas as he walked down Main Street, not in the shackles Tommy and Miller intended, but side by side with Mayor Thompson. Banners proclaiming, "Welcome home, Silas," were strung haphazardly above, their painted greetings already cracking under the heat. A peal of jubilant, if slightly discordant, church bells echoed. Leo Maxwell, balanced on an apple crate outside his family's stand, brandished a small, homespun flag with an enthusiasm that threatened his precarious perch. He'd witnessed Silas disarmed, humiliated, nearly imprisoned. Some recompense was due, even if unnoticed. Silas met his gaze. A flicker, amusement, perhaps, touched the man's face as he inclined his head. The procession halted before Maxwell's fruit. Mayor Thompson, face florid with pride and exertion, addressed the gathering. Citizens of Oakhaven, let us express our thanks to Silas Blackwood, a true patriot who served our nation with courage and distinction. The cheers amplified. Silas, visibly uneasy, gave a curt wave. Leo, emboldened by the acknowledgement, squeezed forward, offering a perfect, sun-ripened peach. Thank you, son, Silas rumbled, accepting the gift. Juice trickled down his chin after the first bite. Brings to mind orchards back. Never mind. You wouldn't, by chance, have a napkin, would you? Leo, momentarily stunned, dashed back to the stall and returned with a handful. As Silas wiped his chin, Leo blurted, "Did you really face down an entire company of enemy soldiers, sir? Like in the stories?" Silas chuckled, a dry, mirthless sound. Tales rarely mirror reality, son. Suffice it to say, I persuaded them we were more numerous than we were. A well-crafted deception can be mightier than any blade. He winked, then, seeing the mayor poised to speak, clapped Leo on the shoulder. Thanks for the peach. Best I've had in ages. Later, the speeches done, handshakes exchanged, the endless stream of well-wishers finally abated, Tommy and Miller discovered Silas alone on a town square bench, observing the pigeons. They approached with hesitant steps and faces full of remorse. Mr. Blackwood, Tommy began, his voice a bare murmur, we owe you an apology. We acted impetuously. We jumped to conclusions, Miller nodded, his usual arrogance vanished. We were wrong, pure and simple. We're still green. Silas sighed. Learning continues throughout life, officers. Remember, the badge does not impart wisdom, nor does it excuse prejudice. Dig deeper than appearances. Inquire. Listen to the replies. He paused, then a hint of a smile played on his lips. And perhaps ease up on the dime novels for a spell. Tommy and Miller reiterated their apologies, then retreated, properly chastened. As they departed, Silas called out, "Officers! One more thing." They turned, their expressions wary. "That young man, the one with the peach? Find him. He deserves commendation." And so, Leo Maxwell, still energized by his brush with a genuine hero, found himself summoned to the mayor's office. Nervous, he worried the hem of his shirt, wondering what infraction he'd committed. Instead, Mayor Thompson, radiating warmth, presented him with a small, exquisitely carved wooden badge. "Leo Maxwell," he declared, "for your presence of mind, your unwavering support for our returning veterans, and your outstanding contribution to civic pride, I hereby induct you as an honorary junior officer of the Oakhaven Town Guard." Tommy and Miller, standing rigidly, offered feeble smiles. Leo, however, was overjoyed. He fastened the badge to his shirt, close to his heart, and straightened his shoulders. Perhaps, just perhaps, he could become a true hero himself one day. And he already had a promising start in mind.